Welcome back. As we continue off with the conversations this morning, the Minister of Finance and Public Enterprises, Iipumbu Shiimi, delivered the 2024-2025 National Budget Review in Parliament yesterday. The session was adjourned for 2 consecutive days due to a lack of quorum. To give an analysis on the 2024-2025 budget speech and how the Namibian economy performed over the last few months is the country's senior and indirect tax partner, Chantell Husselmann. Well, Ms. Husselmann, good morning.
Good morning, Napewa, and good morning to our viewers.
Thank you so much for making time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Ms. Husselmann, can you just talk to us about your overall impression of the national budget for the 2024-2025 year, and also what was on top of your list, of all the things that you expected to hear from the Minister of Finance?
The conversation started with the tabling of the budget earlier this year in February 2024, and the budget was tabled with 3 specific themed pillars that centers around empowering households and business activity in terms of accelerated growth and support. A second pillar to that was also to retain fiscal prudence, and a third one was a strong emphasis and focus in terms of having productive development budget expenditure. So the tabling of the midterm budget review yesterday is just a continuation of that conversation. And as expected, they were given through major departmental reallocations that's needed per the appropriation bill based on needs as expressed by government departments, as well as also giving us through the outcome of the 23-24 year, where in February that was estimates. Well, as of now, it's actuals. So that's also good insight as to how the 23-24 year turned out. Also coming through with a lower budget deficit for that year as anticipated, a historic low 5 billion, which also speaks to the pillar of fiscal prudence for the 23-24 year. And then the midterm review also continued with confirmation around what we can expect on tax policy development, which also speaks to the pillar of boosting economic growth as well as supporting households in terms of having more purchase power per household.
All right. Now let's talk about the status quo of the entire budget. With modest growth in the GDP as well as revenues, does this budget really represent a return to relative normality?
If we take the analysis of revenue specifically, for the past 7 years, revenue close to double, and that's from a traditional base of traditional taxes, where government revenue always comprised, for at least 90%, always comprised of tax revenue from existing legislation that we have. But the most incremental growth, that steep incline, is as of 2021-2022, which is post-pandemic. So one would say it's still close to post-pandemic, so we might not have reached our full potential of rebounding and having local economic growth pick up as reflected in terms of revenue growth. Coupled with that was also the establishment of the semi-autonomous revenue agency, which one can also contribute to or add to this conversation, where, for example, the tax incentive scheme definitely also played a role in terms of the increments noted in revenue projections and actual outcomes since 2021.
All right. Now, the total revenue collections for the financial year of 2023 to 2024 stood at 81.5 billion, slightly higher than the revised estimate of the 81.1 billion. Now, this is due to the over-collections in some tax categories, including the income tax. What do you actually make of this?
Added to those figures is a further increment that was budgeted for in the 24-25 year, and yesterday even further upward revised with the mid-year budget review, where we now expect 92 billion of tax revenue compared to the 81 billion. So that is also a big contributor to that will be the increment in terms of the SACO revenue pool. So the SACO revenue pool has always been the main contributor to total tax revenue. In terms of percentages, always varying from 30 to 34% of total compositions, just to give you context to when I say it's the main contributor. So obviously the SACO revenue pool, Namibia's share is impacted by SACO's global trade, as well as Namibia's intra-SACO trade with rest of SACO countries. So as the economic landscape change and as the trade fluctuates, we are exposed to how that fluctuates. But a positive to end with to the question is the SACO revenue pool, for example, increased over the past 3 years from 14 billion to 24 billion, and now budgeted at 28 billion. So not to say we can expect the same over the MTEF, and the speech as delivered yesterday is also cautious in the MTEF predictions in that regard. But also to acknowledge the positive growth over the past 3 years.
Yeah, which also brings me to my next question when we speak about the threshold for the income tax on individuals, which is basically to 100,000. It was increased earlier this year, and the ministry is committed to further adjusting all tax brackets for the inflation creep. What does this mean for our viewers, perhaps in layman terms?
Such an adjustment is a direct injection in terms of the ability per household to spend more on goods and services, or the alternative to create an increased savings culture per household as well. So meaning you will pay less tax per month and having more income at your disposal. It does not necessarily impact, or it does not impact the unemployed. To have a direct benefit on the unemployed, one should have more careful consideration around, for example, the tax on goods and services, like having more basic foodstuff zero rated, for example. That is more direct employed. But to the employed, I think most of the tax-paying employees have experienced already that return of tax where there was an overpayment, either by a lump sum payment at September or October, or some are also experiencing it as a form of a tax holiday break where they now pay no or less tax until February just to remedy the overpayment. So in principle, it's positive because it also counters the impact of inflation on food prices. And also what's positive in the speech, as mentioned yesterday, is government's committed to keep revising that in the 2 outer years of the current MTEF. That's estimated at around 700 million impact on government's ability to collect tax on pay-as-you-earn. But in the bigger scheme, pay-as-you-earn is also contributing around 24% to about a quarter of total tax revenue. So that's just context to how much it in total, the collective contributes.
But what do you make of the further reduction of the non-mining corporate tax, which is reduced with a reduced rate of 31% that was in April 2024 to gradually reducing, that is of course until 28% for the financial year of 2026 to 2027?
So that's definitely speaking to keeping Namibia more attractive towards new business activity that locals can embark on, also boosting the spirit of entrepreneurship. If you wish to, specifically on medium-sized entities that wish to operate in close corporations or private companies and not per se the sole traders. And also keeping Namibia more competitive in terms of attracting foreign investment. We've always been on the higher side compared to South Africa and Botswana, for example, but obviously the respective economic landscapes of each country should be taken into account. So yes, so that is also the business fraternity is looking forward to the benefits coming through with those 1% year-on-year reductions, of which the first one is already enacted. It is just also crucial to note that, again, in terms of tax composition, corporate tax contributes around about 12 to 14%, so that is on the lower end. So what is needed from a traditional tax collection composition would be that having increased business activity. And hopefully with all the needs expressed towards SMEs, for example, also in the mid-year budget as tabled yesterday, that through those various interventions or initiatives, it can also boost entrepreneurship. It's just important then that business owners take up the responsibility of staying tax compliant and paying their way.
All right. Now, the finance minister also expressed concern about capacity and institutional and operational constraints that limit the implementation of developmental projects. What are your thoughts on the National Planning Commission's initiative to identify particular bottlenecks and propose recommendations to improve the pace of project implementation?
To that point, I would say that it's been experienced much more last year this time, where there was a bigger sacrifice in the development budget compared to this year. But again, for this year, there is a 700 million sacrifice of reallocation from the development budget towards other departmental needs. So it's definitely a much needed intervention as well. As we need productive expenditure to ensure that we can speak to social needs, but we can also create employment, and we can also create the much needed infrastructure for business in the private and public sector to flourish.
All right. The tax amnesty period was also supposed to come to an end today, but that was announced by the minister as it was extended by another 2 years, that is until the 31st of October 2026. What does this mean to taxpayers?
Well, it was quite a week of everybody having bated breath in terms of which way, because it was also the same week that it would have had the initial sunset clause was set, and then having the speech not delivered for 3 days. Also contributed to, so I know about a lot of taxpayers, whether it's individuals or corporates, who for example, for reasons beyond their control, were not able to participate. So that announcement definitely comes with great relief and would be much welcome in that space, specifically where the taxpayers are not in direct control in terms of how this is executed and the pace at which things happen. So again, there is twofold for me, the importance that NAMRA can come forth in giving much needed support to make sure that where there is an audit to be conducted, where there are payments to be allocated, so that the needed capacity and the needed ITAS technical support through their system is given to taxpayers. Yes, it's another 2 years, and 2 years sounds long, but there is there's a lot of work to be done. So that's the onus on NAMRA, and again to the taxpayers, the onus on us is not to leave things to the last minute. We've all felt it this week, and it's definitely not to repeat. And every time it is said, this is the last extension, and there will be a time when it's the last extension. So we should all learn from the experience.
For now, we have 2 more years to relax. All right, Ms. Husselmann, thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you for that analysis.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, Good Morning Namibia continues shortly after this. Don't go anywhere.